Okay.
All right, don't squish anything out of this.
All right.
You want a
So
circle on this? What's on it? Oh, yeah.
the first thing when you're looking at, a sheep heart here is that you always want to make sure you can orient yourself as to how it is you're looking at it. So for example, notice how from this surface that we've got that I'm showing you right now, there seems to be a diagonal line going across that surface. Whereas when we flip to this side, there really is no diagonal line. And if anything, the only kind of implied line is maybe this fat tissue going kind of transversely across.
Okay, sorry.
Little soundtrack to this.
Star Trek.
Dun, dun, dun. Okay. So, it is the anterior or front surface of the heart that has that distinct diagonal line. So for that reason right now, that means that this is the right side of the heart, and over here is the left side. So that's just our first way to orient ourselves. It is a diagonal line of fat forming a sulcus right there that goes, again, diagonally across the front of the heart, so we know that that is the anterior surface. What if simply enough I pointed right here and asked you to name that region?
Apex.
Of course, the apex, exactly, yes. What tissue do you think you're seeing along here and along that sulcus and along this area here?
Pericardium?
Nope. What tissue are we seeing in white here and here? Adipose. A lot of the sulci, the various sulcus structures around the heart are mainly filled with adipose tissue. So that's actually what that diagonal line is a sulcus largely filled with adipose to kind of cushion the coronary vessels inside. All right, well, another thing I can do is kind of take the tip of the probe here that I've got and just ever so slightly lift up on the outer surface of the heart. And what you find is that there's basically a clear membrane that I'm just barely lifting up there. If I asked you to identify that structure, what would you say?
Yeah, mater.
Okay. You have two potential answers. One is epicardium. The other is what?
Visceral pericardium.
Visceral pericardium.
Okay.
Remember, we don't just say pericardium because there's the fibrous layer, there's the parietal layer. So this membrane on the outside of the heart is specifically either epicardium or visceral pericardium.
And that's the
Thin membrane clinging to the outer surface of the heart. All right. What if I were to hold the heart more upright and point out this small flap-like structure here or the similar one on the other side right here?
That'd be a muscle.
The auricles. These protrusions here and over here are those extensions of the atria, which again are called auricles. It just so happens that they're a little bent out of shape from being in the bucket, but
So they're kind of like muscle flaps?
exactly, like little flaps of muscle, yes, because really the whole wall of the heart is muscle. So yes, they're just continuations of the chambers. So the general now way to perform the actual dissection here is I'm going to use a scalpel and begin up at the right auricle and cut down toward the apex to basically flap open the entire right side of the heart.
Could you show the pulmonary trunk and
I'm not going to test you on those. You can see them here. For example, we can see the pulmonary trunk right here. There's even a little piece of the aorta over here, but they're not clear as they are on the as much as they are on the plastic models. So what we've been kind of listing as we go is what I'm going to test you on the sheep heart, and that's not included, those vessels. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and make that cut that I just described. I'm going to start up at the right auricle and cut down toward the apex. Okay.
I know. I'm waiting for something to like squirt out.
Yeah.
Oops, my bad. Little formaldehyde.
Okay, just bear with me. Of course, the thing is when dissecting a heart is that you want to cut into the chamber, but not all the way through the chamber such that you end up cutting the septum in the middle of the heart. So that's the, you want to make sure we don't go too deep, basically.
I think he's done this before.
A few times. Okay. Let's see. Let me cut a little bit higher up here. Okay. Then we've got this handy dandy tool.
Retract it. Great.
Okay. What's nice now, of course, is that I get to hold this up, and it holds it open for me. Isn't that nice? Okay,
That's awesome.
all right. It'll rotate.
Do a little rotation.
Little rotation.
Thank you, Vanna. Great,
Gorgeous, gorgeous. Okay,
right, Vanna.
it's like a new car. Yes, it's like slowly turning, yes. Okay, now, the idea here is that we have opened the entire right side of the heart.
Okay.
The way that we can tell it's the right side of the heart is notice how relatively thin its wall is. You know, this device that I'm using, this kind of what I call a spreader, is, you know, is digging into the wall, and the wall there is not that thick. Now notice a couple of things. One thing we want to point out is that over here to the side of the chamber, there's a little slip of muscle that right now is passing over the probe. This is one of those structures that was not really shown in any of the models thus far, but now there it is. Exactly, the moderator band. It almost looks like a little rubber band literally right now passing over the surface of that probe. Right, I'm using the probe to lift on it. And so sure enough, that little slip of muscle passing right now over the surface of that probe is that moderator band
And that's in the right
in the right
atrium?
ventricle.
Ventricle, sorry.
That actually brings up what I was going to mention next, which is now how to determine what chamber we're looking at. And actually right now you're looking at two chambers. Remember, I told you I was cutting from the auricle all the way down to the apex, which means when I opened up this entire flap of heart wall, we were actually opening up two chambers. The question is, how do you know where the atrium ends and where the ventricle begins?
At those fibers?
Well-
Where those fibers are?
Notice how what I'm lifting right now at the tip of the probe are the white flaps of tissue, which are the cusps of the valve. And I'll flip over this way. Can't turn anymore, right? All these white tissues right here are the pieces of the valve. And of course, notice if I use now the probe to push on all these little strings, what are those? The chordae tendineae. Okay, it's coming around, it's coming around. Okay, ready? Notice how right now I'm using the tip of the probe to lift up on a bunch of little white strings. Those white strings here are those chordae tendineae.
That separates the atrium from the ventricle?
Well, let's look at it this way. If I remove that probe and I point down here and I say name the chamber, and notice how clearly beneath the valve you are. What chamber are you in down here? Specifically, which ventricle? The right ventricle, because we know based on the thickness of the wall and the presence of the moderator band that this is the right side of the heart. Therefore, this chamber down here must be the right ventricle.
If we said ventricle, we could say right or left.
Can you
Nope,
see
no
the
credit.
papillary muscles on this, or you just assume?
We will in a second.
Okay.
The valve.
The valve itself are the white flaps of tissue that the strings are attached to at the top. So for example, what if I pointed up here and I said name the chamber you're in? You're now in the right atrium, and you can tell because now you are superior to all of the valve. Right? If the valve is these white flaps of tissue, then up here you are above that valve. So sure enough, up here you are now in the right atrium.
Where's the
Professor
moderator band
Trinity?
again? How do I know that that's the right?
Again, blood vessels we're not identifying.
I am sorry.
It's okay?
Moderator.
That whole thing I'm seeing is the right side?
Yes, all of this is right side. Right atrium above, right ventricle below.
That's the right in the corner on the left.
Where's the
It's
valve
not
again?
whole side is
That's
right.
the whole side is the right.
The white flaps are the
there,
valve,
okay.
and you can tell because they've got the strings, the chordae tendineae, attaching to them.
Where are the papillary muscles?
Just about to do that. What do you think? Notice how a bunch of these chordae tendineae all come down to a bump of muscle that I'm pushing forward with the probe right now. Notice how that one single bump of muscle seems to attach to a whole number of those chordae tendineae right there. So that is a papillary muscle.
Can you like point it down? I totally can't see what you're doing.
Muscle. Right here.
There's a protruding muscle down at where I'm pushing it forward with the probe.
At the end of the strings.
Right? Exactly right. The papillary muscles are always attaching to the chordae tendineae. So you could trace down any chordae tendineae and find a little projection of muscle and know that that's a papillary muscle. It just so happens that the biggest one is right here, and you can clearly see all of those chordae tendineae attaching to that one little projection. So that one little projection right here is one of those papillary muscles. All right. What if I again use now the tip of the probe to lift up a clear membrane now on the inside